7 p.m., the dishes aren't done, dinner's half eaten, and your little one has been screaming for 45 minutes straight. Nothing you try seems to work, and you're wondering if you're the only mum going through this nightmare. Sound familiar? If you've ever felt like you're failing because your child becomes a tiny terror at the exact same time each evening, I understand completely. Last week, my youngest screamed for an hour while I tried every trick imaginable. After almost 6 years of raising 2 children through these challenging phases, I've discovered what's actually happening during those dreaded witching hours and the practical strategies your family can help you get through them. So what is witching hour? Is it real? And yes, it is. So picture this. It's 5 p.m. You've barely had a moment to yourself all day, and suddenly your normally happy baby turns into an inconsolable, screaming bundle of frustration. Sound familiar? I remember this exact scenario with my firstborn. There I was trying to prepare dinner with one hand while bouncing, swaying, and just desperately shushing my little red-faced girl who simply would not stop crying, no matter what I tried. That, my fellow mums, is the witching hour. It's a genuine phenomenon that affects babies typically between 2 weeks and 4 months of age. And when I say hour, I'm being optimistic. For many of us, it can stretch into several hours of evening fussiness that just feels like it might never end. Despite how incredibly common this experience is, it's amazing how blindsided most of us feel when it happens. I remember thinking, I must be doing something really wrong. Like, am I not feeding her correctly? Is she uncomfortable in her clothes? Does she have a tummy ache I couldn't fix? Is she tired? Like, these questions swirled in my mind as I tried everything in my mummy toolkit, and nothing worked. What nobody told me then was that witching hour has a predictable pattern. It typically begins around 2 or 3 weeks after your baby's due date, not birth date, interestingly enough. For most babies, it peaks at around that 6 weeks when they're at their fussiest. And then, like magic, it usually resolves by around 3 or 4 months. With my first daughter, Maisie, I noticed the first signs probably when she was about 2 weeks old. And by 6 weeks, our evenings had become just this clockwork nightmare from around that 4 to 8 p.m. And then almost to the day when she turned probably at 14 weeks, the evening fussiness just vanished. But of course, our children don't read the parenting books, so your timeline might look a little bit different. But the signs are unmistakable once you know what you're looking for. So during the witching hour, babies display this inconsolable wailing that seems impossible to soothe. They, might arch their back or clench their fists and draw up their legs, resisting all your normal comforting techniques. And like storm clouds gathering, the tension just builds until your baby seems to erupt with overwhelming feelings that they can't process. With my first child, I believed I was just failing as a mum. I remember every evening sitting on the kitchen floor, both of us crying, and I rang my own mum and I was like, what am I doing wrong? And I was just crying. She was just so upset. She couldn't be settled. And my mum was so good. She was like, I promise, like, this is normal. But yeah, it didn't make the crying stop, but it did make me feel less alone, which is exactly why I'm sharing this with you now. What surprised me most was when I had my second daughter, I was discovering that witching hour doesn't end with babyhood. Now 4 and almost 6-year-olds still have their own version of the witching hour, but the crying has evolved into, whining, negotiating, or dramatic meltdowns over seemingly trivial things like the wrong color cup or those things. But the timing remains consistent, right around that dinner preparation time. And I suppose understanding what's happening during these challenging hours transformed my experience. When I learned the biological reasons behind my children's evening fussiness, not because it made the witching hour disappear, it didn't, but because I stopped blaming myself, which made it infinitely more bearable. At its core, the witching hour is a developmentally normal period when little ones process the day's experience, so that immature nervous systems become just overwhelmed with the accumulated stimulation. By evening, the sensory overload creates this perfect storm of fussiness. Combine this with overtiredness, hunger, and also many babies cluster feed in the evening, and developing this circadian rhythm. And, you understand what the evening meltdowns occur. For toddlers and preschoolers, the mechanism is similar, but manifests differently. They've been holding it together all day, following rules and navigating social interactions. And by the evening, their emotional regulation tank is just empty, and home is where they feel safe enough to release these feelings. The most important takeaway is that your child's witching hour behavior isn't a reflection of your parenting. It's a normal, even though challenging, phase of development that countless families experience. But is this universal, or is just an easy label for normal crying? Let's examine what science tells us about this mysterious time of the day and why researchers believe the witching hour is very much a real phenomenon with biological underpinnings. So have you ever wondered if you're just imagining that your child's meltdowns follow a suspiciously predictable pattern? You're not, and there's science to back it up. Those evenings when your little one transforms from a happy baby to an inconsolable bundle of tears aren't just bad luck or poor timing. It's a recognized phenomenon that developmental experts and pediatricians acknowledge as a genuine biological pattern. When my daughter was tiny, I remember the child health nurse nodding knowingly when I described our evening struggles. This witching hour, it's a real neurological pattern. It's not something parents invented. And being validated was incredibly reassuring during these difficult early months. What surprised me most was learning that despite this scientific recognition, so many mums still face dismissive comments from well-meaning friends or relatives, and even some professionals. Oh, well, all babies cry, they say with a shrug, or, oh, my favorite is, oh, it's just colic, it'll pass. And these seemingly innocent remarks can feel incredibly isolating when you're in the thick of it, especially when you know there are genuine biological factors at play. I remember one particularly difficult evening when a family member suggested I was, making too much fuss about my daughter's daily meltdowns. And she didn't understand that the witching hour stems from this physiological change occurring in babies, in their brains. So let's talk about what's actually happening during these challenging hours. So first, there's the circadian rhythm development. So newborns arrive with no concept of day and night, and their biological clocks take months to mature. During this development, the evening hours becomes a neurological no man's land. Not quite day, not quite night, and then leading to increased fussiness as their bodies are trying to figure out what's happening. For breastfeeding mums, often a natural dip in milk supply that occurs in the evening. I noticed this myself around at 5 to 6 p.m. when my daughter would just feed more frequently, but she just seemed less satisfied. And then my body just generally produce less milk at that time of the day. And that made her more frustrated and hungry despite feeding more often. One of the biggest factors is the sensory processing overload. Like a baby's nervous system is immature and it's still developing the ability to filter out unimportant stimuli. Think about how overwhelming a shopping center can feel when you're exhausted. The lights, the noise, the people. Now imagine experiencing that with a brain that can't yet distinguish between important and unimportant sensory information. By evening, your baby has been processing stimulation all day and their little system simply reaches capacity. This overwhelm is a biological reality clearly documented in research on infant development. Babies literally cannot process any more input, and the only way to communicate this distress is through crying. It's their way of saying, I've had enough and I don't know how to handle all these feelings. And understanding this can transform those moments when you're questioning your parenting abilities, with dismissive comments from others. But what makes this even trickier is that our own bodies work against us right when our children need us the most. Adult cortisol levels naturally dip in the evening, making us less equipped to handle stress, just as our children reach their fussiest point of the day. When your patience feels thinner at 6 p.m. than it did at noon, that's biology, not weakness. I see the same pattern continuing with my girls now with their witching hour meltdowns. Just last week, my youngest had been content all day, but come 5:30, a broken pencil just triggered the tears, the screaming, the meltdown that just seemed wildly disappropriate. Her triggers and expressions are different now, but the thing follows the same pattern as her infant witching hours. Understanding this, though, has been life-changing for me as a mum. Knowing that my children aren't being deliberately difficult helps me respond more with patience and support. The witching hour isn't about bad parenting or bad children. It's about developing brains, navigating these complex neurological processes. And now that we know the witching hour is real, let's explore what actually triggers these challenging periods in our little ones. Because while the biological foundation is similar for most children, the specific triggers can vary dramatically from one child to the next. And understanding your child's unique triggers is the key to making evenings more manageable for everyone. So have you ever noticed how witching hour seems to hit at the exact moment when you're trying to cook dinner, help with homework, or simply just catch your breath after a long day? It's almost uncanny how many children's meltdowns perfectly coincide with when I'm chopping vegetables or trying to help my 5-year-old with her reading. This isn't random. It's what I call the perfect storm of challenges, and it's all coming together at once. The truth is, witching hour follows this predictable pattern because it's triggered by specific factors that tend to coverage at the same time each day. For babies, these triggers can feel nearly impossible to avoid completely. I remember feeling trapped in a cycle I couldn't break with my eldest daughter. No matter what I tried to prevent her evening fussiness, it just seemed to happen anyway, leaving me wondering if I was doing something wrong. So overstimulation stands as one of the biggest culprits behind witching hour. So think about all the things your baby experiences throughout the day: lights, sounds, movements, new faces, different rooms. Unlike us, babies haven't developed the ability to filter out unimportant sensory information. So they take in absolutely everything. And by evening, it all catches up with them. Their little brains hit sensory overload and simply can't process any more input. I experienced this dramatically when one evening when my daughter, she's always been sensitive to noise, just began crying as I ran the food processor to make dinner. The same sound hadn't bothered her all day, but by 5 p.m., even the washing machine in the background was just too much. She startled at sounds she'd normally happily ignored hours earlier, showing me just how overwhelmed her system had become. Overtiredness plays an equally crucial role in triggering witching hour. I learned this lesson so much when I thought skipping my daughter's afternoon nap would help her sleep better at night. That evening, she screamed for nearly an hour while I attempted to prepare basic, simple macaroni pasta. Missed naps or short daytime sleep can make evening fussiness dramatically worse, creating a baby who's exhausted, but also just unable to settle. Hunger emerged as well as another major trigger with my other daughter. Even just slight delays in feeding would transform her usual fussiness into like a full-blown meltdown. And eventually I realized she just needed to eat earlier than our family dinner time, so I started giving her a meal first while we were preparing ours. And these little simple changes reduced her witching hour intensity significantly. For toddlers and preschoolers, like I said, the witching hour looks different, but it happens at the same time. My youngest comes home from kindy now and she just falls apart. By 5:30 every day, she's been holding it together, following the rules, but by the evening, she's just completely spent. For older children, social and emotional processing becomes a significant trigger. They need time to decompress and make sense of their experiences. Sometimes my older daughter will reenact scenarios from her day during a witching hour, and we try and work through those confusing things that happened at school or processing new things she's learned that day. But the struggle with transitioning from an active day to a calmer evening routine affects toddlers and preschoolers particularly. So my 4-year-old comes home full of energy with stories to share, but I'm often distracted, with household tasks which need my attention. And that mismatch creates the perfect environment for meltdowns. The anticipation of bedtime separation can also trigger witching hour behavior, and children become more clingy and whiny at bedtimes as bedtime looms, not because they're being difficult, but because they're processing the upcoming separation. So key triggers that I've learned to watch out for include, overstimulation from sensory input, overtiredness from missed naps or day sleep, hunger, especially when the meals are late coming out, emotional overload from processing the day's events, difficult transitioning to evening routine, anxiety about bedtime, that bedtime separation. So understanding these triggers doesn't magically make witching hour disappear, but it gives us valuable insight into what our children are experiencing. When I recognized that my children were trying to make my life hell, that they were struggling with these biological challenges as well, it changed how I responded to them. My frustration decreased and my empathy increased. Remember that time your baby screamed for 2 hours straight and you found yourself crying in the bathroom? You're not weak, you're human. And witching hour takes a massive toll on mums, on our maternal well-being. I know because I've been there, hiding in the bathroom in the shower, running to mask my sobs, wondering how I could feel so broken from this tiny person I love more than anything. But the thing about witching hour that nobody really talks about is how the daily reoccurrence creates this unique form of stress. So each day brings the certainty that regardless of how wonderful your morning might be, by 5 p.m., you'll likely face the same battle again. And this predictable pattern builds a special kind of anxiety that accumulates over time, affecting every aspect of your well-being, physically, emotionally, and socially. Society has these ridiculous expectations of motherhood, and we're supposed to handle our children's most challenging behaviors with endless patience and grace. And Instagram shows us mums calmly soothing their fussy babies while simultaneously preparing organic meals and maintaining pristine homes. Meanwhile, in reality, many of us are just trying to survive until bedtime without completely losing our minds. And the gulf between the expectation and reality is where mum guilt flourishes. What's rarely acknowledged is the genuine trauma that can develop from dealing with inconsolable crying day after day. During Maisie's witching hour phase, I reached a breaking point that just shocked me. I just began dreading 5 p.m. and this intensity that felt almost physical. By 4:30, I felt my heart rate increasing, my shoulders just tensing, just as that clock was ticking closer to that time. And that anticipatory stress changed how I experienced the entire day. And the timing of witching hour feels almost deliberately cruel. It coincides exactly when you're trying to prepare dinner or, help other kids. Or like say hubby would come home from work and they would walk in and, it's just crazy. So I think if you have a support person, I honestly feel like it's, if some of us are lucky to have someone that walks in the door at 5 p.m., think of your support person as a lifeboat arriving during the stormiest part of your day. Like when my husband, came home and he took over one particularly difficult evening and I literally felt like a drowning swimmer and I finally reached this solid ground. And that momentary reprieve, even just 15 minutes, restored my ability to cope and gave me the strength just to continue. And my husband and I kind of developed what we would call the tap out system for those particularly intense witching hour moments. It's a no questions asked signal that one of us needs a mental health break. Something saying something, I need to tap out just for 10 minutes. Or even just, we would just look at each other and we knew this look. And the other person immediately would take over, no guilt, no discussion. And those brief pauses to breathe and regroup have saved our sanity and our relationship on countless occasions. But self-care during witching hour needs to be practical and immediate. So when you're in the thick of it, try these quick relief strategies. Taking 5 deep breaths while the kettle boils, playing your favorite song loudly in the car, exchanging a quick text with a friend who is going through the same thing and who understands, connecting with other parents who understand can be particularly powerful. When I finally opened up to my mum friends about, what was going on in the evenings and how much I was struggling, the relief was immediate. They shared their own experiences and offered practical support like dropping off dinner or taking my toddler for a play date during the baby's witching hour, or just adjusting your expectations during this phase is another form of self-care. I stopped scheduling, evening activities and simplified our dinners and lowered my standards for housework. And those adjustments reduced my stress considerably and it gave me more capacity to handle the challenging hours. For stay-at-home parents, it's especially important to discuss what you need from your partner when they return home. Maybe you need a few minutes to wash your face and have a cup of tea before re-engaging, or maybe you want help preparing dinner and that's your quiet time with your partner, reconnects with your children. Having these conversations before witching hour hits makes everything smoother. So perhaps the most important strategy is self-compassion. On the hardest days when nothing works and everyone's crying, remember that you're doing your absolute best in a genuinely difficult situation. Witching hour isn't happening because you're doing something wrong. It's a normal developmental phase that countless parents face. Remember to be gentle with yourself through this phase too. Too often, self-compassion is the first thing to go when we're stressed and sleep deprived. Remember yourself that all parents experience something similar and there's nothing wrong with you needing and accepting support. As we reach the end of our witching hour journey, remember this isn't a reflection of your parenting. It's a normal developmental phase that every child experiences uniquely. The fussiness, tears, and meltdowns don't mean you're doing anything wrong. The greatest gift you can give yourself during this challenging time is self-compassion, permission to be imperfect and to ask for help. Trust that both you and your child will get through this together. Millions of mums stand with you in solidarity. So tonight, when the witching hour begins, can you remember to extend the same kindness to yourself that you give to your little one?
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Real Mummy podcast. Remember, every mum's journey is unique and you are doing an amazing job. Please be sure to head over to our website at www.realmummypodcast.com to stay up to date with the latest episodes and dive into our recent blog articles filled with even more wisdom and stories. We absolutely love connecting with our listeners, so don't forget to follow us on social media. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Real Mummy Podcast. Join the conversation, share your thoughts, and become part of our supportive mum community. And I'd love to hear from you. Have you got a topic you want covered? Do you have a guest you'd love to hear from? Reach out to us through our website or social media. Your input is invaluable and helps us to create the content that matters most to you. Thank you for being part of the Real Mummy Podcast family. Until next time, stay strong, stay kind to yourself, and remember, you're never alone on this journey. You've got this.